welcome everyone to Admit One with gmoney. Today, we have the Director of Research for Proof and host of the Proof Daily Countdown and the ultimate resource for NFT market statistics every day. Please welcome NFTStatistics. Well, do you go by NFTStatistics or Punk 9059?
I don't know. It's kind of evolved into Sam or NFT Stats, or I have way too many names. And I haven't figured out how to brand it. So
okay, well,
I wish I had a better answer. Whatever you like.
All right, well, I'll tell you, you should probably figure that out soon, because if you have too many names out there, people are like, who? So you should.
It's true. True.
My unsolicited.
I guess NFT Stats is kind of what people default to.
NFT Stats, yeah, and I just wanna commend you on like the awesome work that you do. I love the charts and the analysis that you always put up, and I think it's always very intriguing and thought-provoking and leads to a lot of discussion. I know a lot of times, like, I'll respond to something or I'll read the conversation that's happening. So I really appreciate everything you do for the space.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of times I'll tweet stuff mainly just to kind of see what conversations happen in the comments. And I'm sure you see this too a lot. You really like, especially with the show, sometimes I don't know everything that's going on, so I'll tweet about something and just try to add a little bit of flavor to it, and then hopefully get to learn through what people respond with.
Yeah, and I wanna. Well, first off, congratulations on 50 episodes. I believe it was yesterday, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it was in that post, or was another post where you were kind of talking. You kind of went through like your routine of how you do 4 to 5 hours research in the mornings, and then put that put together all that work and then put it out and all that stuff. So I wanted to know if you could kind of walk us through, and I very much identify with what you said about all that work, because I used to trade equities, and I was based out of New York. Obviously, New York Stock Exchange opens at 9:30, but trading opens at 4 a.m. But for the most part, it's very illiquid. You get the most liquidity once the New York Stock Exchange opens. But I would get in every morning. The latest I would get in would be like 6:30, and during earnings season, I'd be getting in at 4 a.m. So I would be reading, 4 to 5 hours every morning about pretty much every company out there in order to be prepared to trade for that day. And so I really identify with doing a lot of work, right? Like, because like that whole, people, you have an output of, anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes where you take all that content and put it into like a really digestible output. But there's a lot of work that goes into that. So one, I want to commend you on that. And then two is, I'd love it if you could kind of maybe talk about a little bit of some of the stuff you look at. Like, what's your routine of like how you go through things in the morning?
For sure. Yeah, I actually have a similar background. In my first job out of college was doing equity, was working on the trading floor. And but I worked in San Francisco. So I had to get in every day at 3:45 for 2 years when I was 22, 23. So I have a little bit. It's been 18 years, I'd say. I'm 41 now, so it's been a while since I got up so early. But yeah, definitely know that routine a little bit. But yeah, so I guess I get up. I don't even set an alarm. I just naturally get up at like 4 or 5, and then I have a lot of data that I run myself, just like Google Docs I built or scripts I run, and I just have to like copy and paste something from a script into a doc, and then it gives me a lot of charts. So I normally start with that, and then the second thing I do is try to figure out what the big sales were. I think oftentimes, like, just from looking at like what the top 100 sales were in NFTs overall, it's getting harder because there's more wash trading. But looking at like, I have different scripts that show me the biggest art sales. So just looking at like Super Rare, Foundation, Manifold, get a feel for that. I really like to talk about artists. So, I normally bundle it with a sale that they have. So I want to figure out what those are going to be, try to figure out what's going on in art blocks. And then, so it's kind of like first the data, then the sales, and then the stories, then I'll look at different accounts that are good at like news aggregation, look at different websites. Honestly, sometimes I just Google NFTs. As weird as it is, just typing NFTs into Google sometimes gives me something I didn't know. And then once it's at that point, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just trying to figure out how to turn it into an interesting story that adds insight, something that where like I can use kind of my SQL skills or like just ability to gather data. Like, what are the questions? What's just like a different angle or a chart that people haven't seen on this story? I try to find that and make it so it's a little bit kind of value add for people who already have an idea what's going on.
I mean, that's awesome, because I think obviously storytelling is super, super important, right? Obviously, especially when it comes to data. I think one thing I want to before I'd love to start talking about the state of the market, but have you started integrating ChatGPT into your workflows yet? And if so, how? I'm always curious as to how people are using AI to kind of streamline their processes.
I have not, and I'm eagerly awaiting for a robot to take over my job. I use ChatGPT for fun, but I have not started to integrate it into the work I do. But I definitely should. I definitely should start to at least, like, it does feel like right now, like one of the big narratives out there is just, I think there's like this narrative that AI is taking over everything. And I think that the other narrative is that people who understand how to use AI are the ones who are going to really be the leaders right now. So I feel like that is something I got to do when I get a little bit more time to figure out how to kind of up level there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been super annoyed because I've been trying to sign up for like the pro version on OpenAI, and it won't let me. Like I can't sign up for it. I've been trying to sign up for a week. So I've been wanting to mess around with GPT-4, but I haven't been able to for that reason. It's been very annoying.
Yeah, I haven't even tried, but definitely would like to as well. And Kevin Rose has talked about how like he's using ChatGPT to write like programs for him and scripts. So one thing, and I'm naive here, but my sense is that it's not great at updated news that are like what's happening in the current moment. That at least ChatGPT, I think, like even if you ask it like the floor price of NFT prices, it normally gets that wrong. Because it does feel like it has to grab like pretty, which I think Google could understand floor prices of NFTs. It just feels like that algorithm's more based towards kind of things that require a ton of data and a bit more history. But
it's funny.
I'm not the expert here.
It's funny you say that because we have an API in the Admit One Discord that like just went live, I think last week. And so people have been like asking it questions or whatever, and you can see like the queries that people are asking. And I asked for the CryptoPunk floor, and I think it said 0.03 ETH. And I was like, I'm like, did Machi really dump it that low? Like, what the F? But but yeah, it's
I don't think he's got a lot of power. I don't think he's got that much power.
Well, I think that's a great, like, I'd love to know your thoughts on the farming. I keep an eye on it every once in a while. I'd love to know your thoughts on the farming. I know, especially a few weeks ago, with the Bored Apes farming, Franklin and Machi were like the two big ones, and then Machi got dumped on, and it looks like the same thing just really happened in CryptoPunks. I'd love to hear your take on it and like your thoughts, because I've been watching from afar, but admittedly, I might be missing some stuff here and there.
Yeah, man, I have so many thoughts. And I'd say so much of what I'm trying to do is build the charts that really display what's actually happening. That's like the most ongoing kind of thing I'm trying to work on right now. But yeah, I mean, one quick thing, and this isn't important, is that Franklin actually is not as big as people think. Machi's huge. I think we just all know Franklin, and like number 2 through 50 are anonymous. So
right. Well,
we always kind of bundle Franklin in there, but there are a lot of players who are bigger than he is in terms of the impact they're having out there right now. But here's kind of my big picture.
So question is, where does Franklin...
Oh, sorry, go on.
Where does Franklin fall on that scale then? He's like 51, or is he in the top 50?
See, the thing about Blur airdrop farming, what they're incredibly good at is like, when I worked at Uber for 8 years, and at Uber we had what I call a leaderboard culture, where every city could see exactly how many trips they did on a 7-day basis. And so every minute, you're kind of comparing this week versus that exact minute a week ago, and you're constantly needing to build and get bigger and bigger. The reason I mentioned that is Blur does the same thing, where you have a 24-hour clock. and they show you who has the most points over the past 24 hours. But every hour you got to keep building points, or you're going to recycle a day ago's numbers. And so all you know is what the 24-hour leaderboard looks like. But Franklin tends to be, I don't know, like last I checked, he was like 50, something like that. But it changes every hour. And that's a really effective tool because it's like this constant. It's this hamster wheel. You constantly got to continue to get more and more. Your points get updated every 5 minutes. So it's this massive dopamine hit. Every 5 minutes you just get to see how many more you got, what worked. I think it's super well done if the goal is gamification and getting people hooked. But to answer, I think when I check, Franklin's normally like around 50, but sometimes he takes a break. He does list stuff on OpenC, so he's not getting like the loyalty points. Like he's got a bit more going on than just like pure airdrop farming, which a bunch of the accounts have. Right. But in terms of my basic take, kind of like my big picture thought on what happened here. So on February 13th, that was when basically the community got over $100 million of Blur into their wallets. And it was just this massive liquidity drop for everybody. And the prices of NFTs really rallied. And with that, the way to get more, people got so much money through that drop that people wanted to get right back on the horse and do it again for the next season. And the best way to get points, especially in the beginning, was just to put tons of bids on NFTs. And you wanted those bids to be as close to the price as possible. So what ended up happening was you just got more and more bids for NFTs that pushed prices higher. And I think a lot of people who were long a lot of NFTs saw it as a great chance to exit. And we really just saw that in Punks. Punks is a good example because Punks just started. But, airdrop farmers pushed the floor of CryptoPunks up to 75 ETH. We haven't been at 75 ETH, in 7 or 8 months. And there are all these people who who claimed 50 punks 5 years ago and have been kind of patiently selling. But this gave a lot of people the chance to really, really sell. So what ended up happening is you kind of had this NFT transfer from long-term holders to airdrop farmers. That's kind of like the first thing that happened. And then I think over time, it wasn't that big of a deal because airdrop farmers could pass them on to each other. But you've seen what you're seeing right now is the airdrop community basically just got massively long. And eventually kind of the music stops and people have to sell because these guys don't want to hold so many NFTs of a collection. That's like not their business. And the second piece about it is that you need more ETH because ETH is what you can put bids on every NFT collection for, which is what gets you more points. So you don't want to be in NFTs that much because it's the ETH that allows you to get more points. So, and that's a little bit different now maybe because they're giving listing points, but those listing points, we don't know exactly what they mean because they actually don't update that. But what we then saw happen was, Machi, the first example of this was Bored Apes. He got stuffed with 70 at 78 ETH. And then, 3 days, it was fine for a couple of days, but then 3 days later, he's like, I got to get out. And he sold 70 at like 58 or 60. And, we saw someone dump 500 Moonbirds in one go. We saw someone dump 500 VV checks in one go. VFriends yesterday, VFriends has gone from 6 to 3.5 in 3 weeks. Someone sold 18 in one go, which is a ton for VFriends. There's like a very precarious situation right now in Azuki where one guy has got stuck with 2,600 ETH of Azuki, all through bids. And the other thing that happens is once these guys get huge positions, you want to build bid walls so you can sell them. And the best way to do that is to bid yourself. Because if people see that someone's bidding on 100, they'll feel more comfortable putting bids up. Then you can pull your bid and dump them on everybody. And then you just get these chain reactions where everyone who got dumped on, they don't want to hold them either, so they continue to dump. So I kind of see like the big picture here as like these long-term holders were the initial sellers. They were given to airdrop farmers, and there aren't really like new long-term buyers right now because it's a momentum game. And I think when you see someone dump 500, it doesn't exactly entice FOMO. So right now you just have the situation where you don't really have players on the other side who want to pick them all up. So I think like that's why we saw this initial rally. All this Blur came into the ecosystem. Like bidding was the way to make money. A lot of people took advantage of that. And now the question is, who's there on the other side once the farmers recycle it amongst themselves 100 times? Like, who's the real buyer? Because we already had the real seller. And I think like this just accelerated this process of like a lot of people getting out of positions, and I don't know who's going to pick it up on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. One is I will say what you describe of like people putting in bids to entice other people to put in bids. That is like a thing in professional markets and equities. It's called spoofing, right? Where you like somebody would put up let's say like they have to buy 100,000 shares of a stock so that they can sell like 25 or 40,000 shares of the stock, right? But immediately pull it because people when they see bids, they're like, there's support there. I can find somebody to sell it to, right? But then they sell into the people that they kind of like fake into buying it. That is, I don't know. I think it is illegal in security.
I mean, two things happened here. One is that there were enough people who were building bots where the minute they saw people sell, they would withdraw their bids. So Blur has had to ban a bunch of accounts because like doing that systematically with bots was the strategy. The second thing is I think what we're seeing with like Franklin and some of these other guys who are doing a bit of the manipulation is like they're actually learning how the bots behave. So the bots will see, like this is like the more legal bots, they will see someone put up bids for 100 V1 punks and then they'll follow, so I actually think you have a situation here where some of the traders are kind of learning how the bots behave. And you saw this in V1 punks a few days ago. Like Franklin and a bunch of other guys started buying at 3.8 ETH. They ran the floor all the way up to 6.5 ETH. There was a ton of bid wall that kind of came there, and then they started dumping. And right now we're right back to 3.8 ETH. So I think they're like, it does feel like there's a bit of manipulation going on, and everyone is so incentivized to bid that you have like, it's not as hard to kind of put that candy down and get people to actually take a bite, because bidding is how you get your points.
Yeah, it's crazy. I put in a couple like low bids on Blur. I don't necessarily care about the yield farming, but it's like the thing I do like that still OpenC hasn't been able to figure out is like, how can I put multiple collection offers out there quickly and easily? And Blur has figured that out, right? So that like, I just don't want to sit there and spend 25 minutes throwing out bids for a collection. Is like, I just want to do it in like 2-3 minutes and walk away. If I get hit, great, right? But
on OpenC, like I had to like go into a Discord and ask a bunch of friends, how do you withdraw a collection bid? It's so hard. Whereas on Blur, you just push the X. Like, yeah. I think they've really figured out a lot of this kind of like playing around at floor price game. I do almost all my personal trading on Blur. I think, and a lot of it was why I understood it better. Like I will airdrop farm just to learn. And yeah, I mean, they have a great, it's not Blur that I think is creating some of these weird dynamics. It's the incentive structure. Like when you have a player that is rewarding behaviors that might not be economical with 800 ETH per day, or 700 ETH per day of airdrop, which is kind of the amount we can expect right now. Like, and say, if you go do these things that lose you money, which is what's happening, the airdrop farmers are all losing money. I mean, Machi Big Brother is down 3,500 ETH in realized gains, and he's stuck with 100 punks that he bought 10 ETH higher. So he's going to be down more than 4,000 ETH. Franklin is down more than 200 ETH. The average guy is down like 50 to 150 ETH, but it's okay because you're getting this reward. You just have this weird external thing here where there's this like, this airdrop that's leading to people doing weird things.
But like, I mean, I'll push back on that, right? Because it's like, okay, so Machi, let's say Machi's down 4,000, right? How much do you think he will get what's Blur trading at right now? I don't even know. I got my airdrop and I sold it at like 110, and I haven't looked at it since. What's it at?
Yeah, I think it's at 60 cents. Yeah.
Okay, 60 cents. So how much do you have any idea of how much he'll probably get in rewards?
I think that Machi's in trouble. I don't think, but I think your point is very valid, and it's not in disagreement with what I've said. It's actually in alignment with what I've said, which is that like people are doing things that like don't make sense like in a normal market environment, but the airdrop is going to cover that. It's going to make up for that. So you have people who are entering things that like in a normal environment, if there weren't the incentive, like wouldn't make sense, like bidding on these NFTs, putting in bids for 100 V1 punks, like that, it just would never make sense. There's not that much demand in like, this from equity trading. Like trading is about knowing where buyers and sellers are and matching them. Here, like the only buyer is the airdrop farmer. Yeah. So, but because they're getting the points, they are doing these things that no one would have done 6 months ago, and that's kind of driving this behavior.
But but to me, the thing that like messes this all up, right, is like you're saying they're getting 700 or 800 worth of ETH at today's prices, right? But then you have to assume that when season 2 is over and that airdrop happens, you're going to get a shit ton more supply on the market. So like the price dumps. So like people that are factoring in is like, all right, well, I lose 1 ETH today, but I collect like, 1.5 ETH in rewards in terms of like blur farming. Like that's at today's prices. And you can't, I would assume that like blur is like just from a structural standpoint is probably on a path to zero for the foreseeable future, right? Because like there's going to be so much sell pressure on the actual token itself, I think short term, that like you can't literally sit there and be like, okay, well, once I get my blur airdrop, I'll be able to recoup all my losses. Because I think like the price will be probably significantly lower than it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what happens with Blur. Like every time I talk to Kevin about this, he's like, he has the same view as you. I like have given up on trying to predict where crypto prices are going a lot of times. But yeah, I mean, there are so many. We don't know how much bid points get, or how much listing points get you. We don't know how many months the season is. We don't know exactly how much supply is going to be in the season. We have no idea what the forward is for Blur ETH ratio in 6 months. Like there are so many things you don't know. But I do think the game is fun. And that's where I think like the dopamine hits and the scoreboard and all that stuff kind of comes in. I think people are kind of hooked on getting more points, but economically it's really hard to measure.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been like watching, like I said, I've been watching a little bit from afar. And I guess the question I have is how does BenDAO play into all this? Because I know you've been tracking BenDAO before the blur farming with the stuff that's been going on in there. Because every time, like I only pay attention to BenDAO when we get close to those liquidation points and people start doom tweeting about it, and I'm like so to me all of this to me is picking up pennies in front of a steamroller, and that's a game that I personally don't like to be in. Like even when I was trading, I never liked writing puts, right? Even though something like I think it's like 97% of puts expire worthless and out of the money, but to me it's just not a game that I like playing. And also it's like for me, like the whole reason I got into crypto is because I like the convexity of that trade, if I'm right, where it's like I can risk X, but I can make multiples of that X if I'm right, and I don't need leverage in order to make those multiples, which I think is very unique to the space. So I watch all of this, and especially when like shit starts to hit the fan, I think it becomes really interesting because whenever shit starts to hit the fan in equities markets, there's always a bailout around the corner, right? Like we're seeing that with all these banks and everything that's been happening in the last 2-3 weeks. But it's like there is no bailout of like, if somebody gets hung with like 100 or 20, 250 of a certain asset of a certain project. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch, but I'm just an observer. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how BenDAO fits into this entire equation, if it does at all.
Yeah, I think, BenDAO, for all that I've tweeted about it and all that the world has kind of focused on it, I think the team at BenDAO has done a really good job protecting their lenders. For all the excitement around it, there's still never been a single default. Basically what happens is as soon as the floor price gets within like 25% or 20% of the amount of debt that, like, if I borrow money against an ape, let's say the floor is at 60 and I borrow 40 ETH, as soon as the floor price gets to like 50 or 52 or something like that, they're going to trigger an auction. As long as someone out there with the floor price at 52 is willing to pay 40 ETH, then the ape gets covered and everything's fine. And they reward people who make that first bid. So what we've seen recently is like, as soon as things go into auction, the ape owners have basically been coming back and just paying off their debt. So I don't know. I mean, the risk is that you get something that happened like with Azuki last May, where news came out on it's gap risk, right? Like where news came out about Zagabond and the floor went from 30 to 12. Like that's the type of situation that would like destroy BenDAO lenders. But right until now, like other than that, there aren't really that many gap moves in NFTs. They tend to kind of drift lower as opposed to like for Bored Ape floor to go from like 50 to 39 in one swing. Like that just has been pretty rare. So recently it hasn't led to that much craziness. The most of the people who are long the apes and who are borrowing money against them tend to pay off their loans before they actually go into auction. I mean, the risk would be just like 50 of them come into auction at once, and people are like, I know the floor is 50, but I don't even want to pay 39. Like, that would be the big risk. We just haven't seen something like that happen.
Right. And I guess overall, in terms of NFT lending platforms, which one? I know there's a bunch of them out there. Which ones have you been the most interested in? Which from the ones that you've been tracking, think are very interesting. So I'll start with, I don't like a mark to market lending platform, right? Like if I'm going to post an NFT as collateral, I don't necessarily want to be mark to market on that. And I'm not even going to use my ape, like let's say a floor punk, right? It's like, I just don't necessarily want to deal with, I guess, the gap risk that you speak of, right? Like I would much rather have personally, and I'd sleep better at night being like, okay, I have X amount of days to pay off this loan. This is what it is. And as long as I come up with that money, it's mine. Like very similar to a mortgage, right? And I think NFTFi, Arcade are along those lines. But I think is it JPEG and along with BendDAO are mark to market, where it's very much like equities. And they're both very different models. I'm super curious as to your thoughts on both of those models, or even if there's another model that I don't even know about yet.
Yeah, I think those are the two main ones. War Daddy Capital, Dalton on my team, has done a bit more kind of deep diving into this. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is right. And I think what we did see, and it's kind of interesting to watch Franklin's wallet, because he's one of the guys who borrows money with his ape so that he can do more airdrop farming. Or he can, I don't even know if it's airdrop farming, so he can do whatever ARB he has on. But then if like the ape floor sinks like it has recently, like he's out there trying to get liquidity as quickly as he can. So you'll see, like he's out there trying to pay off his BendDAO loans, then he'll sell the apes, get more cash, pay off more BendDAO loans. Like there just is that risk with these peer-to-pool models, which is the word for JPEG and BendDAO, where you're basically just, as the price goes, that's what triggers the auction. The other thing that's interesting is that you get these public auctions. So like with BendDAO, as the price goes lower, you get a public auction. More supply like is visible to everyone, and we can all track it. Whereas NFTFi is kind of much like NFTFi and Arcade, they're just like much less on the radar screen. Like I give you a loan, you have a month to pay it off. If you don't, I get the NFT. That's it. It's not as dynamic. So I don't know. Lenders can get more right now for NFTFi. Like BendDAO is still only paying like 11% on your ETH. So lenders, and you can tailor it more. It's just BendDAO's a lot easier, a lot faster for people who want to get in and out, like what Franklin does.
Right. Yeah. It's just, I think it's the type of lender and borrower, right? Because like if I'm posting, I mean, there's no way for me to post my punk as collateral on BendDAO, right? Because there is like my ape, there's no mark to market on it, right? Because apes trade so infrequently that it's tough you can't set a mark on it. And so for me, it makes more sense to post it as collateral and be like, hey, I have 90 days to pay off this loan. And if I don't do it, I'm in default, and you own the NFT. So I think it's really interesting. I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is you talked about selling puts and kind of like, I don't know, picking up peanuts in front of a steamroller. I think that happened a little bit in the lending scene. Like, NFTFi like loans were at an all-time high at the beginning of 2023. And people like on punks right now, people are getting paid like 7% APR. Apes like 20 to 30%. It felt like it was the first time I've ever seen NFT people get excited about making like 3% per month. It always just felt like it was a little bit weird how there was all this energy into NFTFi lending or into some of this lending relative to, I think, some of the risks that we're seeing right now when prices really kind of start to move lower. But
I think
I kind of had that same sentiment
to that,
of like peanuts and steamrollers.
But I guess the argument I guess I would use, because I think SquiggleDAO was probably the first lender to really do this, was they were lending like super high LTV. I think it was like a year ago, and correct me if I'm wrong if my numbers are off, they were lending super high LTV, like 75 or 80% LTV, and it was like super low rates. It was like maybe 10%, maybe less, because they actually like they wanted people to default, right? Because they wanted the squiggles, and it would technically be cheaper to do it that way than to sweep the floor, right? And I think what you see with like lenders giving those low interest rates, and I don't know what the t the loan to value ratio was on those punk loans, but I feel like it just really is people are like, all right, well, I would be happy owning this at this price. So I'd assume that those people that are loaning at lending money at such a low rate are maybe more likely to be long-term buyers than people that are total economic actors that are like, all right, well, if they default, I'm flipping this right away, right?
Yeah, it actually is economic acting. I mean, there's definitely people who are out there doing like loan to own type stuff, right? If someone wants to borrow like ETH on a 1 week basis, like there's a chance they're not going to have it in a week, you know. And I think there are people who know that. So there's definitely been a lot of money made off defaults. You know, where I've seen people who, you know, who borrowed 30 ETH against an ape and then didn't have the 30 ETH, so they lose the ape. So the lender basically, you know, bought the ape for 30 ETH. So that's definitely a model that we've seen. We've seen a lot of stuff that's worked. I think we're starting to see stuff that's not working, where people put on loans that ultimately like just weren't really getting compensated just for the straight up risk they took for the floor price going down 40% in a few months or something like that. But yeah, what you're talking about definitely happens.
Right. But I think that, it's interesting because I feel like those people obviously will run out of money quickly, and then the smart actors and the sharks, if you want to call them that, but there's the people that are more educated in lending and risk and that will probably end up taking over. And I think it's just super interesting. Even as you were talking about this situation here, is like this is all almost, it's like we're beta testing. Like imagine if instead of Silicon Valley Bank failing, 2-3 weeks ago, all of a sudden like people could be bidding on their book like in real time in public auctions, right? Like this is, and that was like one of the things I really liked about NFTs when I first got into the space, is like these things that becomes, these blowups that have systemic risk in, the greater financial system. Like, there is value to having like this thing public on chain, so that all the market participants understand what's going on, and it's not like panic when shit starts to hit the fan, right? Like even to the conversations we've just been having, is we are all very aware of what's going on in Blur and BendOut and all these things, because people start discussing it and having these conversations, of what happens in event of this or what happens in event of that, as opposed to a backroom deal being done over the weekend that people have no clarity on, right? Like that's to me what gets me really excited about all this tech, is I can see a world in, at some point in the future, I don't know if it's 5, 10, 50 years away, where these type of instruments become available to the greater financial ecosystem, right? That is operating on today. And what does that start to look like when it's not necessarily a picture of a JPEG, but it's like a mortgage bond or, a bond even, right? Like, and what that starts to look like.
Yeah, it is. I always feel a little bit weird. Like I try to be a nice person, right? So I always feel weird tweeting someone's P&L, like Machi's down 3,500 ETH. But there's something about this Blur situation where everyone wants to do everything from the same wallet. So you really get this like really good visibility into everything that's happening with individuals. And like, while I feel weird, I'm kind of like, if someone wrote about my P&L on Vanguard, like Vanguard would probably go to jail. Like that'd be like an invasion of privacy if they actually gave access to my book to other people. But, I get when you sign up for this game, you're basically saying that everything's going to be in public, and that's going to be part of people's decision-making and knowledge. And yeah, that's super. It certainly makes what we do, I think, pretty interesting and fun to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool. I didn't realize that, right? Because they're incentivized to do everything from the same wallet because you want to get max points. That's really cool.
Yeah. And as you get higher and higher, you get a bigger multiplier. So like, I mean, yeah. So you're really incentivized to do everything from one account. It makes like the data analysis, I think, easier than it's ever been.
No, that's really cool. I wanna segue a little bit. I know there's been a shit ton of macro headlines in the last 24 hours, and get your thoughts of, you know, everything from the dovish hike to Yellen coming out. I tweeted this last night where I want somebody to make a meme of the scene from The Godfather when Michael Corleone is christening the baby and he's becoming the Godfather, and then while that's happening, pretty much he's whacking all of his competition, and basically I would have Corleone be the U.S. government, and then maybe like the banks that are failing be like the baby getting baptized, and then like all these crypto exchanges that are basically like they're going after all at once to kind of like shut off on and off ramps as the people getting whacked. Like that is kind of the way I view it. I'd love to know your thoughts on macro. And I mean, I just checked the price of ETH literally right before we got on, and I see it's made back all its losses. I don't know if there were any new headlines that came out this morning, but I'd love like your take on it and your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think since I started the show, I have focused a lot more on like very NFT specific stuff as opposed to like the macroeconomic picture. So it's not something I feel like I'm quite as like I have quite as strong a take on. I think one thing that I have thought was interesting was after Silicon Valley Bank, like that weekend when that news came out, or between like knowing they were going bankrupt and not knowing that they were going to be rescued, or that depositors would be rescued, not shareholders, but depositors, like you started seeing crypto rally in a way that I think people had kind of hoped it would for a long time, which was like, this is not just about risk on or risk off. This is not about just Fed liquidity. This is about people seeing crypto as like an interesting alternative to the banking system. And it feels like I kind of want to say it feels like we've had a little bit of that tailwind recently where ETH has gone up, Bitcoin has gone up, and it has not been because we've been in this like massive risk on environment. I say that, but like the stock market's up like 2% today. And I guess we have had a pretty strong week in the stock market, but that's kind of one of the things I'm curious about is, do we ever get to this place where the narrative around crypto takes over versus like the past 3 years, it's really just been a proxy for risk. And that's one of the things I'm kind of curious about as far as like having a stronger view on like the Fed and where we're going. I feel like I'd much rather hear your opinion than go into mine too deep there.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with your thoughts of it seems like there's a decoupling or a new narrative that's taking form, right? Where it's not just risk on, risk off, and it's more of, okay, well, do I, and I think Balaji has done a really, really good job at like kind of almost like sounding the alarms, right? And I think the fact that somebody like him, who is not known for these types of tweets, putting these types of tweets out in at least in recent history. I'm not sure if he did it in the past. I'm sure he didn't do it in the past. And making like these bets, right, that don't seem to make sense, but he's a really, really smart person. So you have to kind of want to figure out, it's like, why is he doing this? And I think it's just kind of like having people have that shift in narrative. And I think if you ever talk to people that have come from these high inflation countries, like they know the value prop of Bitcoin. Like, right, it's like when we're like, oh yeah, like why would you ever use Bitcoin to transact? It's like, if you've lived through a hyperinflation or a massive currency devaluation, like IRL, like like I think there's so many smart people in the space out of Argentina because they've lived with this their entire life, right? Of being like, yeah, like our currency gets devalued overnight. I see the value prop to this, not just because I think its number go up, is because this is just so number doesn't go down, right? Purchasing power doesn't go down, which I think is kind of an interesting shift that's starting to happen, that used to happen in the third world, that's now starting to happen in the first world because of, all these things that are starting, these cracks that are starting to enter into the system. But yeah,
I mean, I think that it's like hard to kind of get our head around how much money was dropped into the system during COVID. Like we had 2 to 3 years of just so much printing, so much money being dropped into the system. And we're now like in my everyday life, I feel like I feel the inflation effects. Like it is very hard on my salary to cover anywhere near the expenses we have. I think everybody feels how expensive the world has become. And the Fed, like you had Volcker who took rates up tremendously. And I feel like the Fed was kind of imitating that a little bit. And then suddenly you have a bank that goes bankrupt and that has a bank run. And suddenly you start to see the downsides of the hiking that was really necessary to kill the inflation. And like the inflation hasn't been killed yet, but there was just a pretty big roadblock in the path towards stopping it, in the sense that like you're starting to trigger a banking crisis. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of allowing inflation to keep going versus deal with, again, I'm not sure if the data suggests that inflation, like that it's in any way under control, but it just feels like they're a little bit stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
Yeah, and but here's the thing is, because I felt like there's been multiple times in the last 15 years where I have felt like the Fed has no options, right? Like it's end game. And then it's like watching like an MMA fighter that's about to be like put into a submission move, just like do like a backflip and like get out of it and then like turn around and put you in the submission move. And I feel like that happens so much with the Fed where I'm like, there's no way they can do anything, right? And then they do something, I'm like, wow. I'm like, that's fucking crazy. I'm like, they kept the game going for longer.
What do you think that might look like here?
I have no idea because I feel like every iteration of QE that's happened, or I think it originally started with TARP back in 2008, and every iteration since then has been slightly different, but it's all been the same thing, and it's all been a thing that like calms market participants, and the game keeps on going. That I'm almost convinced that until this game probably continues happening until one of two things happen. I think would be, one is maybe the dollar would have to lose its reserve currency status, but I think that would also be super dependent on whether the U.S. is a top one or let's say top three superpower in the world, where we have probably the biggest military in the world, us and China, right? And I think it's like those two things are kind of like are the things that are like keeping the game going, where people are like, yeah, well, we have to play this game because of these two things, right? And I think we see a lot of moves of our enemies trying to set things up so they don't need to rely on the dollar as much anymore. But it takes way longer, and it happens way more slowly than people expect. It's not where it's like, yeah, well, we're gonna stop accepting dollars for oil overnight, right? Like those contracts take a long time to like unwind and renegotiate and accept payment in different routes. But yeah, I have no idea the way they're going to do it, but I've always been amazed at how they always managed to somehow do it, whether it's the Fed or the ECB, where we had a couple of years ago we had huge problems in Europe, right, with the pigs down south, and it's just been interesting to watch. Like it's crazy that it's been able to go on for so long.
Yeah, again, I'm a little out of my depth because I'm not looking at charts and stuff. But I did find like even the U.S. dollar was like still a risk asset. Like for all the narratives, it just felt like I don't know, when equities were weak, so was the New Zealand dollar, so was the year. Like it felt like a lot of these risk paradigms like are still in play, but I haven't really been following as closely over the past few months.
So then I guess a question I have, and this will probably take us to the top of the hour, but how do you think this what do you think this means for NFTs, right? Because I think that's the question that a lot of conversations I've been having over the last few weeks is like, okay, what do you think? Because ultimately, what does the global macro mean for the micro of NFTs, right? Like we were discussing the microstructure of Blur airdrop farming, but then where does that incremental buyer come from, right? Like to the point you said earlier where, okay, now you have a lot of short-term buyers that need to offload inventory in order to keep on bidding for other inventory, but they have to sell to somebody. right? And if the natural buyer isn't there, then that means prices could go way lower. And I think where the natural buyer steps in is very dependent on like the overall global macro, which becomes really interesting, right? Because I'm curious to see your thoughts on the NFT market at this point in time.
Yeah, I think there is a global like when global macro goes crazy, kind of all bets are off. I've done some work on this, basically trying to understand if when ETH goes down, when ETH goes up, people say, okay, like that's bad for NFTs, and when ETH goes down, we know that NFTs go down. So I feel like people a lot of times talk out of both sides of their mouth when they're kind of diagnosing what's causing things to happen. And the work that I've done says that like as long as ETH is pretty stable, NFTs can do well. So like when ETH, it's something like if it's down more than 10% in a week, that tends to be really bad for NFTs. If ETH goes up more than 15% in a week, that tends to be really bad for NFTs. But anywhere from ETH down 10 to up 15 over a week, like those are environments that NFTs have historically done well. So I think like from a macro perspective, NFTs just kind of want a bit of stability. But I think there's like NFTs have a macro piece, but there's also a very micro piece, like an extremely micro piece, which is how do people feel about owning them? Like there has been a time where owning a Bored Ape was like the ultimate flex, and people, you only have 4,000 owners. Like this isn't like a massive market, and all you need was people to be like, man, like owning an ape would make me feel good. It would be a flex. I want to collect them, and people just feeling connection to the brand. And I think that is a lot of what I feel is starting to fade. It's like when prices, and this isn't about Bored Apes in particular. Like one of the things that's amazing me about Bored Apes is whenever people are like, Bored Apes are done, like Ben DAO is about to happen, there's all this leverage coming around. Like people come out of the woodworks who just want to own them, and who just want to own really nice ones. And it's happened like 3 times this past year where like the floor has gotten in this 50, 60 range, and like people just start buying them because they want to own them. But I think like when you look at a lot of the other brands, like as the price starts going down, people feel less good about owning them. So it's kind of like this reflexive thing, like putting a Grail doodle as your Steve Aoki kind of PFP. It means a lot more when like the doodle's floor is rallying and people are excited than when it's gone from 15 to 3 or 15 to 4. So I think that to me, the question is like, how can people feel good about owning NFTs again? How can the teams do things that make people excited about their brands, that make people excited about the projects? And I also think like when you see someone dump 200 in one swing, and like there was something about when like 10 were trading a day that it felt like it was like this unique privilege to own one. And I think right now we're in this environment where 200 are trading in 10 minutes, and people just kind of like lose that connection a little bit. I personally started selling some just because like, I don't know, I just don't like that. I don't feel quite the same connection. I'm like, there's all this liquidity, it's gamified, but I think we've lost a little bit of that connection people feel, which was ultimately like what made them do well over time, what made them status symbols, and what made people want to own them. But that's a lot of rambling, and it's kind of soft, and it's really hard to kind of put into a story, but it's a very weird phenomenon, people spending $50,000 on a JPEG. And, that was what was happening. And I think it was about like this connection and status symbol. And I feel like that's the thing that these brands got to figure out how to restore.
Yeah. And I think, so to that point is, I think part of it is you have to figure out how to build brand affinity that's not linked to financial gain. And I think that's kind of the hole that a lot of these projects are kind of in, where it's like people were big fans of them because they're like, oh, I made $1 million on Bored Apes. I love Bored Apes. And when the price starts going down, then somebody that bought in at a higher price is like, well, like this isn't going up, and I expected it to go up. So I think that's like and that's not just specific to PFPs. I think that's something that every NFT project has to deal with, and I think a resetting of expectations. But I agree with you. I think that it means something very different with a lower floor price than with a higher floor price. And it's going to be interesting to see how all that stuff plays out. I think...
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I just add to that, I think in 2022, we saw that projects were very good at building hype around a mint. And then projects were really good at building hype around that first airdrop where you expanded the ecosystem and people got their free money. Like one of the great moments of 2022 was when, when Zagabond said like, check your wallets and you got 2 beans. Like that's the stuff, and pretty much every, Moonbirds had oddities and Doodles had duplicators and, Bored Apes have been masters of this with mutants and other beads and now with the power sources. But I think like the part that we're trying to figure out right now, there kind of came a point last year where airdrops stopped making people money. Like Cool Pets was actually a real negative for Cool Cats. World of Women Galaxy was a real negative for World of Women. Like took a little money out of the ecosystem, spread the ETH across more NFTs. Like we saw that it started to hurt projects when they did airdrops. And I think everyone's just trying to figure out, okay, what does a 5-year project look like based on something new? And all the different brands are like doing something different to figure out what that looks like for them. And that's kind of what we're watching right now.
What do you think is the right strategy? I'm sure you have an opinion on it. What are your thoughts?
I think like what everyone's doing is interesting to watch. Like Doodles has gotten so much negative energy, and I think they're a little more confrontational than you want to be with your holders. I think you have to like love your holders at all costs and deal with, even when holders are negative, you have to appreciate them because they've invested their family's money with you. And I think that's really important. And I do think sometimes that brand, like those guys are a little confrontational around that. But I also think like they've been incredibly consistent. Like if you listen to Carly Riley with Jordan, with Poopy in like January 2022, like a year and a half ago, he was talking about this idea of trying to become a brand that gets global recognition. And that's like their strategy. And, and it's a very slow road strategy, but at least you know what you're investing in. It is like this idea that if they become, and I hate the term the next Disney, but I'll just use it because he does, like, if you become that, like maybe people want your collectible. I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting strategy. I think I like what Azuki does. I feel like Azuki's really good at keeping things mysterious. Like you never really know what's going to come. I feel like everything they put out is high quality. I think they're really ingrained as like a cultural symbol in a lot of Asian countries as well as the Asian American community. I learned that going to NFT NYC. Like at that event, it was just a lot of people who I think saw it almost as like a cultural marker. And I think that's like a way to distinguish yourself from other projects. So I kind of like what they're doing there. I like what we're doing at Proof. Like just trying to focus on art is kind of the core that makes us unique and different. And it really plays into the strengths of the company. It's just going to, these are the types of things though, that like, it's going to take a long time to figure out if you can make the NFTs valuable using these strategies. It's just going to, and it's very different from saying, check your wallets, and price goes up in 10 minutes, so it's a whole new paradigm. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm obviously super curious about this because I'm involved in it as well with the things that I'm doing. So two last questions, and then I'll let you get out of here. One is, I think we're in agreement that, if ETH were to go to $100 over the next 12 months, NFTs probably most likely go down. If ETH goes to $5,000 in the next 12 to 18 months, what do you think happens to, let's keep it simple. What do you think happens to the punk floor?
I think my guess is the punk floor kind of continues to, I think we got to work through this Machi Big Brother situation. Like it is not good, long-term holders who are really selling slowly, basically move their punks from themselves to someone who has shown a tendency to sell very, very quickly, kind of suddenly. So we got to work through that. But I think the punks have been like amazing for their stability. And I as long as we work through this, I think that would continue. It's punks basically went 9 consecutive months through all sorts of ETH environments, through the FTX bankruptcy, through tons of crazy shit. Punks went 9 months without moving 10% in 1 week ever. It is the most that any project here that I've ever tracked has done doing that. So I think like punks have shown a pretty good resiliency during times of ETH volatility.
Okay, so that was a really good way of dodging the question. So if ETH if ETH is at 5,000 in, let's say, 18 months, where do you think the punk floor is?
Let's just say 70. Let's say it just like trends higher a little bit, but doesn't make big moves.
Wow. Okay.
Do you want me to say like 100 or 30? Was your goal to give you like one of those two numbers?
No, I mean, I was super curious to see your take because my view is that, and because listen, the whole since I got into the space, there's always been that conversation of around, well, I think ETH is going to go up, so this is going to go down in terms of ETH. So I'd rather hold ETH than the actual NFT. And my philosophy is, in a major bull market, I want to be holding NFTs that I think will go up in value in terms of ETH, because my view is, if ETH goes to 5,000 in the next 18 months, people will make a bunch of money. People will want to spend that money on crypto native assets, and they'll be willing to pay up for the same reason that, cigars, watches, cars, homes, all these things go up when the stock market's all-time highs. I think like the super, super high quality stuff will have a bid because people will want to spend their newfound wealth, right? And that's my view. So like, I would think that if ETH, what are we at, triples from here, I think the floor is, I don't know how much higher the floor is, but I remember when I bought my zombie, I think the CryptoPunk floor might have been like $1,500, and ETH was at like 500. And like the people I were talking to were like, oh, I'd rather hold ETH because this will probably go down if ETH really explodes. And my thesis was, if ETH explodes, this will explode. Now, obviously, the floor is way higher now, so I don't expect that same level of convexity, but I do expect, I would expect that the floor of CryptoPunks would go up if Ethereum goes up.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting thing that's like happening here, right? Which is, you were there, like the paradigm of, is higher ETH good or bad for NFTs? Like, the time I've been studying NFTs and like looking at the data, the past 18 months, this idea of NFTs as leveraged ETH like has not been true. But that again, like ETH 18 months ago, like these 18 months, ETH has been high the whole time, and we've kind of we haven't had that convex move higher. Whereas if you look at like early 2021, if you look at even the fall of 2021, during that period, what you're saying is exactly right. Like, it was like ETH up is great for you. Like you had some of those, like everything rises together. So I think like, it makes sense to me that given like what you experienced during that, like the real bull market for punks also being a huge bull market for ETH, like, yeah, I can see where like that would be your conclusion.
Right. And I guess maybe I need to amend that a little bit, right? Because in order for it to play out the way I just said, is like, you need Ethereum or Bitcoin to go up multiples from where they are today, right? Because that's kind of what happened starting in 2020 to, was it November, December 2021, where, all like you had the baseline asset going up a lot. Like, if it only went up maybe 2 or 3x, the convexity of the NFT or the CryptoPunk move wouldn't have been nearly as big, because you need a big move on like the underlying in order for that to work, I would think. So
yeah, I think you're probably right. I do think if we get this world where people are like, I need to own crypto, and then like within crypto or within ETH, it's like, what are kind of the things that have survived the test of time? Punks are certainly at the top of that list. So I can see where that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. And last question, because I know we're over the hour. What are the, let's say, top 3 projects you're most bullish on into, let's say, the next 24 months?
I've been enjoying, like, it's been tough lately. The stuff I've been kind of enjoying playing around with are some of these new AI projects. I thought Life in West America was super interesting by Rope Iranisto. I had him on the podcast. I think we just published it yesterday. He's launching a new project. There's this kind of pass that goes with it that gets you access to his next project. And like, one thing I'd encourage people to do is like, I think it's postphotography.xyz. It shows a lot of these artists who are doing AI work with styles that is just like super ownable and really interesting. So I don't know, like when I used to look at Braindrops, I didn't quite get it. I felt like it was very robotic and I didn't really identify with the work. And this postphotography.xyz, it's like AI work that I find super relatable, but also really understand why it's only possible with AI. So I don't know, I've been interested. I think I can't remember, I think it's called the Patron Pass, which gets you access to the next project he's doing, as well as the work he's curated. But I think that is super interesting. Longer term, I think we're going to start getting more of these museums kind of taking NFTs seriously, which we've already seen. It's just been a huge trend over the past few months. And I think that just continues with just, you have like, right, we're already seeing that auction houses are taking NFTs extremely seriously. Like there's a new Sotheby's auction for NFTs every week, but I think you start seeing more of the big museum, the big institutions take NFTs seriously. And I feel like in that environment, like something like Squiggles does well, kind of a bit more of the historic art projects as well. So I know those are a couple of the things that I'm like keeping my eye on.
Music to my ears. Music to my ears.
I mean,
well,
it's not the most controversial. Saying Squiggles is not the most controversial thing if you work at Proof, but I just think that's like a theme that we're going to start seeing more and more of.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was really fun, especially your unpacking of everything going on with the airdrop farming. But I love your takes on Twitter, so please don't stop. Love the conversations that you're always sparking, and dude, I'm just a huge fan of everything that you're doing. So if you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out, and thank you for everything you do for the space.
Likewise. No, it's an honor to be on the show. Really appreciate it. And and I would say, like, just to people listening, my views are pretty nuanced. You know, I've had people say like, oh, you must work for OpenC, and I've had people say you must work for Blur, and people say you must work for Looks Rare. If I worked for all those guys, I'd be a lot richer than I am. Like, I just work for Proof. These are just my views based on my opinions, but I do encourage, like, feel free to DM me if I've said things you disagree with or thoughts you have. Like, I respond to most DMs and always open to a chat. And like I said, I think these are all like very nuanced situations with a lot of pros and cons. So always happy to chat. But Gmoney, thanks so much for having me on. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, ever since just following you on Twitter forever, and then hearing you on a bunch of podcasts. I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for your time. And, thanks everybody for listening in, and we'll catch you guys next week.